The Catholic Morning Show.
One of the nice things about a rainy day is it smells good. But you can't smell on radio, but I'm going to tell you, right, that this morning to smell that like nice, it's raining and you can tell smell. I don't know. It's finally one of the things that made me go, oh, it's going to be spring soon. March rains, April showers, flowers, all those things like this. You know what I'm talking about, folks. It's the Iowa Catholic Radio Catholic Morning Show, 17 minutes after the hour. I'm Bo Bonner with Deacon Mark Campbell, Ayden, Pugh, and Alexia Baker, all of us glad you are here, ready to go with us. On the second half of the show, Aaron Lorch, president of Catholic Passage, will be with us. But let's turn to our first guest of the day. Casey Chalk is author of Wisdom from the Cross, How Jesus' 7 Last Words Teach Us to Live and Die Well. Casey, thank you for coming on the Catholic Morning Show.
Hey, good morning. Thank you so much for having me on.
We appreciate it. So, of course, wisdom from the cross itself, a seat of wisdom, teaching us many things, but the 7 last words have always held a special place in the heart of the Church. What is it that, especially with Lent, as we have our eyes fixed on the Easter mystery at the end of Lent, what is it about the 7 last words of the cross that make us continually go back to them as a Church?
So, like you said, the 7 last words of Christ have been a source of inspiration and comfort and wisdom for the Church going back to the earliest centuries. There's a long tradition of Church fathers and theologians and great saints and mystics reflecting on the 7 last words. And I think that maybe St. Bonaventure said it best when he described the 7 last words as a summa of the entire doctrine of Christ, by which he meant that the 7 last words, those 7 phrases that Jesus said on the cross that are found in a number of the Gospels, encapsulate the entirety of the gospel message. They reflect all that it means to live a Christian life, the entirety of what the gospel means, and also what a good death looks like. And as I argue in the book, the more that we think about what a good death looks like, it's going to inform how we live our lives as well.
Well, in this regard, right, as you said, there's so much wisdom of looking to and attending to the 7 last words. What was it in your life? What was it that caught your attention and motivated you to create a book in the here and now to once more look more closely at the wisdom of those 7 last words?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I had a number of very close relatives, including my father, who passed away, I guess a while now, more than a decade ago. But as I thought about the death of my father, grandfather, and some other relatives who I dearly loved, I looked at their lives and their deaths as kind of an inspiration, because I realized that in many respects they died well. They died surrounded by family members who loved them. They died reconciled to the Church. And I thought, I wonder where that comes from. And the more that I reflected on the Gospels and the 7 last words, the more I realized that there was a really deep, beautiful connection between what the 7 last words say about death. But, like I said, what they say something profound about a number of different topics that summarize the Christian life. So, for example, the first of the 7 last words, Father, forgive them, they know not what they do. We can look at that as, in defining forgiveness, which is an incredibly essential component of the Christian life. Not just that we need forgiveness from God as sinners, but we need to learn how to impart forgiveness to others. Even when they don't necessarily ask forgiveness from us, we have to instill that spirit of forgiveness into our daily lives.
Well, as you obviously have pointed out, that the doctors of the Church, the fathers, the mystics, saints, have time and again come back to the 7 last words. But as one of your the people who made a blurb for you, you as pointed out, you call to witness expert testimony from medical researchers, Nobel Prize-winning novelists. How is it, that you include maybe, like, again, people are expecting to see the saints, but what about these other witnesses that come to your aid to make the point about the importance of these words?
Yeah, so I thought that it would be really helpful for folks to get stories from the saints, because I think a lot of the saints have certainly had deaths, but also lives that connect really effectively and beautifully with the 7 last words, that they've tried to make the 7 last words, part of their own saintly experience. But also, like you said, there's a real richness in literary tradition that overlaps with, our Catholic tradition that can, kind of illuminate a lot of these ideas. So, I draw upon a number of different, great authors and parts of the Western canon, from Shakespeare to Graham Greene, to, kind of like draw out some of these themes, so that I think that hopefully readers will find it a much more compelling and beautiful testimony of how to make the 7 last words of Christ part of their own Lenten experience.
So, going into this, as you said, this helped organize, helped you reflect on very deep personal loss and theological realities, right, that really, you go, okay, the cross is going to help us understand our life and death. That's something Catholics can maybe into it. What was the most surprising aspect that when you dove into these 7 last words, that something unexpected, as it were, came to your mind and is reflected in this book?
Yeah, well, so coming out of Protestant tradition, I was a Presbyterian seminary student. The 7 last words, certainly some, in particular, a few of them have kind of been confounding for a lot of Christians, right? I think, in particular, when Jesus says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And I think maybe, I presume even a lot of Catholics stumble over that and go, gosh, what does that mean that God the Father in some sense has forsaken Christ? And through exploring the testimony of so many brilliant Catholic theologians and saints, like for Robert Bellarmine, for example, I was able to understand what that word, what that phrase means. That God the Father is not abandoning Jesus, except in a very narrow sense in terms of the physical protection that Jesus had enjoyed throughout his ministry that enabled him to complete it, that enabled him to fulfill all that he was called to this earth to do. But that in every other respect, Jesus' unity and an intimate spiritual connection with God the Father remained even while he was on the cross. And moreover, I would argue that's why Jesus was able to say these words even as he was dying, even as he was experiencing tremendous physical agony, that he was capable of uttering these words, each of which I described in the book. You talked about the scientific exploration and test of analysis of the 7 last words. These would have required an incredible amount of physical exertion even to say them, because dying on the cross is something that is basically defined by asphyxiation, right? So each breath is kind of like a love song to the church, to all of us, to express how much he loves us and was willing to go the distance for our salvation.
Well, to alight upon something you said in that wonderful response about the Protestant tradition and how Scripture works, you have another book called The Obscurity of Scripture. You've written about the Catholic and Protestant differences going into Scripture. The 7 last words are Scripture, but in some ways, the devotion arising from the 7 last words is sort of a time capsule, as it were, of what the Catholic difference or maybe the specificity of understanding what the multiple ways that Scripture can lead us looks like. Do you think that is something that arose naturally from the more you considered this Catholic angle, that the 7 last words is sort of demonstrative of how Catholics approach Scripture itself?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, the Catholic Church has this ancient tradition of understanding Scripture on a number of different levels, right? The Catechism talks about the different senses of Scripture. And I think that's something, generally speaking, I would never want to say, entirely, but generally speaking, this is something that Protestantism lacks. Protestantism typically is just looking for the immediate historical textual analysis of, various parts of the Bible, whereas the Church sees that there is a moral component, a spiritual component, an eschatological component to Scripture. And I think that is what has enabled the Church through the centuries to be able to see, to continue to unpack the beauty of the 7 last words. And certainly what they say about our salvation, yes, absolutely. They have much to say about that. But also, like I argue in the book, they have much to say about the Christian life and the gospel in its entirety.
Absolutely. Well, we've got about a minute to go. Before we, let you go, and again, the book is Wisdom from the Cross by Casey Chalk. It is out by Sophia Institute Press. What's the last word? I didn't even mean to make that pun. What's the last word you have for our listeners as they consider approaching the 7 last words, especially here during Lent?
Yeah, I would encourage folks to pick up a copy and make it part of their Lenten journey. I think it's a fantastic way to enter into the Holy Week and reflecting upon all that Christ did in the Passion. And like I explained in the book, it's my words, but I'm really trying to draw upon the entirety of church tradition. So really, I'm trying to make available and accessible to Christians and Catholics today, the beauties of what Bellarmine and Bonaventure and all these other saints through the centuries have said. So, and enter into that beautiful reflection of a rich Catholic tradition as we get towards Holy Week.
Absolutely wonderful. If people want to find out more about your work, where can they find out more about it?
Sure. So my website is just my name, caseychalk.com, and I write for lots of Catholic publications like Crisis, Catholic World Report, The Lamp. So, just Google my name. You'll find plenty of my writing. Absolutely
wonderful. Casey Chalk is the author of Wisdom from the Cross, How Jesus' 7 Last Words Teach Us How to Live and Die Well, out by Sophia Institute Press. Casey, thank you for coming on the Catholic Morning Show.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Listen to the Catholic Morning Show weekdays at 7 a.m. Central on the Iowa Catholic Radio Network, iowacatholicradio.com, or the Iowa Catholic Radio app.